ceremony opening keynote bit. I'm David Dunn. I'm the chair of the UK Tech Cluster Group, and I'm your panel chair for today. Lindsay, could I ask you to introduce yourself with a little bit of background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I am Lindsay Robinson. I am director at Digital City, which we are involved with economic development, particularly for digital in Tees Valley. We're based in Middlesbrough. And we run a number of programs and ways that we support the digital sector, but also we get involved with across the economy with all of the different types of companies looking at digital adoption and digital integration.
And you also had the pleasure of working in an RDA in a previous life.
Yes, been a lot of digital economic development over the years, both local and across the north.
Perfect, thanks Lindsay. Daniel, do you want to give us an overview of what you're doing now and what you've done previously?
Absolutely, thank you very much. I'm really excited about joining you and participating in this discussion. So I'm Daniel Korski. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of Public. So Public is a venture firm that I built when I left government starting 4 years ago with my co-founder, Alex de Carvalho. And basically what we've been trying to do is to help create a GovTech market, a market for technology companies, startups in particular, but not exclusively. They want to focus on transforming public services with new innovations, whether that is in welfare or healthcare, traffic management, or offender management. We've been doing that now, as I say, for 4 years. We run a co-working space called Public Hall in the middle of Whitehall, where we're trying to kind of get all the techies, at least we were before the crisis, to sort of storm the ramparts physically. We run an accelerator program called GovStart, where we take in technology startups and help them through their paces so that they understand the challenges of working with government and adapting to those requirements. And we build our own technology companies in-house, incubator style. Prior to that, I was the deputy head of policy in Number 10, now 2 prime ministers ago under David Cameron, and where I held the innovation and technology portfolio, seeking to do as much as I could on the inside in trying to get government more open to digital transformation on the outside.
Perfect, thanks. So everybody watching, this is a very interactive session. I would encourage you to kind of add your thoughts and any questions into the chat box. But I'm going to kick off with probably a fairly unfair and tough one, because that's what the rest of the panel is going to be looking like. I mentioned this morning that if you're using public funding, it's still very much about trying to evidence a market failure. Do you think we should now be looking at a market opportunity when we look at spending public funding? Daniel, why don't you give us an insider view on that one?
Look, I think it's a really fantastic question, and you won't be surprised that I will prefer to say it's both and neither, no or, right? Because it is obviously the case that if you're going to spend taxpayers' money, and you should do so in circumscribed ways. You should do so in a way that provides value for money, that is transparent, and that critically does not, if you will, use one taxpayer to outcompete another taxpayer. We've got a thriving private market, and when government intervenes, in ways that are that haven't been thought through, there's a real risk that private sector players will be affected. On the other hand, it's obviously also the case that the government has enormous muscle and isn't very good at using its procurement muscle to drive regional innovation, jobs, growth. And two, it's not very good at using that muscle to position the UK in certain sectors and technologies that we know are going to be absolutely important. And of course, it's very difficult to do, not just because we've got to balance the sort of value for money, but we've also got to make sure that whatever trading regime we're part of, we create a sufficiently level playing field so that British companies aren't excluded when they seek to provide innovations in Canada or Australia or France or Denmark. So there's a careful balancing act, but it's absolutely the case that the second piece of using procurement to shape markets, not just to seize opportunities in your language, is critical. And let me just give you, a couple of small examples that may facilitate our perspective. We know that digital identity solutions are critical to so many different parts of our economy and public services. whether it's checking who arrives at our various ports of entry, borders, airports, ports, or tracking people, in the criminal justice system. So we know that there's going to be an incredibly important set of technologies, some of which already exist and are commoditized, some of which are still at the cutting edge, to do with that. And I think, given that we're going to be using these technologies, I think it is entirely right for government to say, is it valuable to have a part of that sector in the UK? And if so, to what extent do we want procurement to play a role, not the only role, but a role in furthering that? And obviously you can hear from my posture that I do think government should do a bit more in thinking about what role procurement plays in assuring a strategic sector, for example, around digital identity solutions.
Yeah, no, that's good. Lindsay, Richie in the chat box has talked about a triple bottom line. So, how do we consider not only the economic values, but the kind of societal and environmental benefits when we're looking at appraising projects? Is that going to help a levelling up agenda?
I think so, definitely. This whole market failure and procurement element, I've never liked the term market failure. I think a lot of the best things that I've seen happen in this area has been more where there's maybe been a market weakness, and it's what can we do to catalyse, what can we do to energise, amplify, kickstart a solution to that, and how can we do that with the government funding that is available, or that procurement that we need to buy, and how you integrate that in is very difficult. And I think what we need to have a look at, and value for money and all the principles in the Green Book, yeah, absolutely. But we need to make sure that we can integrate some flexibilities into there, so that it's in the way that many businesses have realised that it's not just about lean. We can't just, scrimp and get everything to just the last minute. How can we look at more athletic ways of working, and how can we help? When you look at a lot of the solutions that are coming out of COVID-19, there's a buy local element to it. How can we get some of those principles and that flexibilities and integrating in that is very much that social approach and that environmental approach. And some of the best panels that you can develop through public procurement, you can do it in some ways, but there's very few people that have got the experience of doing that, and it's a very costly methodology for managing that sort of panel approach to public procurement. So I think we do need to have a fundamental look at how we can enable whoever it is that's doing that public procurement to do it in a more flexible way, that value for money element isn't just about cost, it's value for money in terms of environmental, in terms of social, in terms of local impact.
Can I jump in here, David?
Yeah, of course you can.
Because I think Lindsay is onto something so critical, which is the skill set there on the part of the policy side and the commercial side in government, both central, arm's length, NHS and local, so that some of these issues that you raise can be considered intelligently. And I think it's probably fair to say that the answer to that, looking at the broad sweep, is no. That we have not prioritized attracting people in policy and commercial functions that understood this. And once in, we probably haven't provided the learning and development opportunities and the incentives to learn and develop how to engage with new products, new solutions. And so there's a tendency to fall back on what the system knows and what the people who operate the system know. And a good set of examples are to be found in the way in which we interpret the existing EU procurement regime. On the whole, we see that procurement regime quite rigidly. But when you look across Europe to other countries, for example, Poland, they have worked within the regime, but done so much more innovatively, and that really is down to knowledge and the culture. And I think we could do a bit better on that. And I think we need to incentivize policy and commercial officials at various levels of government to take on those skills and become better at it. Because I think if we do so, they will become better at their job, delivering better quality. And we might have some of the secondary effects that Lindsay talks about with a local development or ethical development or what it might be.
So how do we impart those skills into the public officials, whether it be the central level or a local level, without crossing the wire into kind of moneyed procurement? How do we collaborate with them to develop something that's going to work?
Well, I mean, from my end, I think it's quite striking that the way we recruit people into, the civil service or the public sector more broadly, has yet to find a way to attract the sort of people who are operating at the cutting edge of innovation and innovative companies. So I think there's a piece around, is the civil service exam, the right way to attract the sort of people we need? And I think secondly, I'm struck by the fact that, most people accept that some kind of understanding of budgets is a sine qua non if you want to rise to positions of power. But we haven't quite set down a requirement to some kind of basic understanding of technology and commercial operations is also a requirement. So I think, I would like personally to see something akin to a National School of Government and Technology, a prestigious institution that government is, if not running, then at least overseeing, although the delivery can, of course, be of many, institutions underneath, but something that is, a bit like the Defense Academy. If you're a soldier or an airman or a Navy officer, you know that you need to go to the higher command and staff course, and you know that it's critical for your career advancement. And similarly, I think we should have a construct where you have to attend the National School of Government and Technology if you seek to, advance above certain grades.
Yeah, interesting.
I think culture piece there as well, David. Sorry, in terms of procurement's not a big bad enemy. It needs to be seen as a way of getting new innovations and ideas in. It rather at the moment it's seen as a barrier to be overcome. And I think there's an element of cultural shift and education as well. We do it a lot with our digital companies locally, in terms of they look at public procurement opportunities at the moment, and they just see a lot of government speak, a lot of paperwork, a lot of forms, and they're put off by even getting involved. Or if they do try and get involved, they don't quite understand the nuance of what that question is really asking. And that's a real shame, because that really does limit the companies that we can get involved with and that we can work with. We do it regularly. Digital City's part of Teesside University. So we're always stretching and asking. But also the companies saying, it would be great if you could work on it with us, but they just look at it and think, absolutely not. I've got no idea where to start.
Yeah, I think procuring innovation in a public sector sense is a very good oxymoron.
On the other hand, to be a bit provocative back, David, in a way, a lot of sectors that I think you would describe as at the cutting edge of innovation deliver innovation through procurement. And what do I mean by that? The entire life sciences industry has moved away from an in-house development concept where the big pharmaceutical companies did everything in their own labs to basically a procurement of innovation model where they have a sort of cluster of smaller companies and labs, and they have various different relationships. Sometimes they're supply relationships, sometimes they are equity funds. Simply to say that they have understood the need for that mixed model and are buying innovation. Government, for various reasons, some good but also many bad, has just always struggled with that and ends up relying on large primes to tell them how to engage with small companies, which to me is often more oxymoronic.
Yeah. No, I think you raise a valid point that the private sector seems to have got this collaborative innovation and procuring innovation right, but the public sector just doesn't want to go there. I don't know whether, as somebody said in the text box, it's it's a risk aversion, which if it is really difficult if you're working in the tech sector because it's constantly changing. So there was a question in or a comment in the text box, which has always been a bugbear of mine, that when you try and deliver programs to overcome a market failure, such as digital adoption or the creation of more tech businesses, you need to tell whoever you're getting the funding from what you're going to do in the next 3 years. How can you predict what's going to go on in the tech sector and what the needs are going to be in the next 6 months, never mind the next 3 years? How do we build that flexibility into public programs? Lindsay, do you want to have a go at that one?
I think a lot of it is education in terms of an awareness raising about just how quickly that sector moves, and making sure that those that are holding those purse strings have a better understanding of that. And then a lot of it is about sharing good practice, like today is about ways of working. And in my experience, there's a lot of skill in being as vague as possible, but on the founding principles of what it is, the type of activity and the type of business you might be working with. And then, a lot of it is fair wind and a good rationale afterwards for when it's being looked at.
Yeah.
Can I suggest some ways of thinking about this? First of all, I think we should ask ourselves, what are we talking about? Are we talking about grant funding or tendering or piloting or whatever? Because I think for each one, we can apply more or less flexibility. So let's just start with the grant funding. And I think Innovate UK, in fact, in fairness to Ian Campbell, the new CEO, is seeking to push in this direction. They're trying to look not at, are we funding programs, but are we backing people who may not right now be developing the thing that they will ultimately develop, but they're on the right track. Almost taking a more of a university approach, by which I mean when a university hires a well-known researcher in a field, astrophysics, geology, it doesn't really matter. They don't say, what exactly are you going to be researching over the next 5 years, or indeed if you're tenured for the rest of your life. They believe that they have chosen someone who within their field of expertise is going to make a breakthrough discovery broadly within the space, but they don't then say, well, that's interesting, you want to look at the gas clouds around this or that planet, but actually we think you should do this, right? They're relying on that individual to know their subject and to test and experiment their way ahead. And I think grant funding needs to work like that more.
But just to interrupt on that one, I mean, there's got to be a line in the sand taken. So, part of my argument to that one is, how does that actually benefit the levelling up agenda? Because a lot of those businesses, they've got a track record in innovation, might not be in some of those areas that we want to kind of give opportunity to.
Well, look, I mean, in my view, there are lots of things here. Let's try to unpack them. First of all, the Nesta report on the missing, I think, 4 billion on R&D, I think is required reading. It's clear that we need to be spending more on R&D, and it's clear we need to be spending that money outside of, I'm going to caricature it as the golden triangle, right? But at the same time, I also think we need to be realistic. Not every town and city in this country is going to become the Silicon Valley, even with the remote working.
Absolutely.
Cluster effects matter, but so there's this sort of balance. And the question is, how can we build institutions that can more intelligently make those choices? Unfortunately, and I get it. Everybody will want to think that they can build the Silicon, Glen, Fern, Valley, Canal, whatever
you can come up with.
Yeah, and power to your elbow, but not, and none of it should be anything else than encouraged. But not all of it should have taxpayer money.
Yep.
At the same time, I think we are reaching a point of imbalance where, and the Freeport discussion is really interesting in this context. I'm sorry to speak at length of this, but it's an important issue. A lot of people say, and said when the government said we want more Freeports, well, hang on, any tax incentives that you provide are just going to have a massive displacement effect. To which I think the government rightly said, yeah, we want a displacement effect. It's a political choice to create a tax system that displaces certain activity into others. We just need to acknowledge that comes with both upsides and downsides, that there isn't going to be an option which is keep everything as it is and also spread more.
Yeah.
And so we should just be careful that when we make these choices, we don't become naive about, it's win-win for everybody. No, it'll have some disruption. There are places that are going to take off more than others. There are places where the tax burden will be greater and the outcomes will be less. But those are all political choices, which I think are entirely legitimate. We should just be open about some of the cost of it.
So to move it slightly away from, I think all the points of Alan, I agree. Everybody sitting around the table agreeing certain things are going to happen in certain areas. It makes sense. Whether you will ever get that, I'm not quite sure. Maybe that is the role of central government. When we talk specifically about the tech sector and tech adoption, there is an argument to say that we should grow the supply side first. We should grow the tech sector. But then there's an equal argument to say, well, actually, it's all about growing the kind of demand side first. Should we be encouraging more companies to do digital adoption? Now, a perfect world is growing them in equilibrium. But if we had to start somewhere, where would you start? Would you start with tech adoption, or would you start with tech supply? Lindsay, I'm going to ask you first.
Oh, that's not fair. I'd probably go tech supply. So if you look at...
Your sound's gone a little bit there, Lindsay. You'll have to come back.
Sorry. If I had to go for one or the other, I'd probably go for the tech sector. If you look at Middlesbrough and Tees Valley, where we are at the moment, a lot of the real success stories have come from talent supply from Teesside University, particularly around animation and games. And you can see how that talent supply has been able to develop and grow companies that have been able to then bring employment, bring wealth into the sector, and that they have then developed companies off that. And so I think I'd rather go for both, if I was totally honest. And I think you have to go for both, but yeah, it's a difficult one, David. It's really important.
It is, but my job is to ask unfair questions.
Let me try to, in politics, there are two ways of solving the unsolvable. Either you say, let me enlarge the problem, or you say, let me break it down, both of which are sort of, cheaty ways of solving the unsolvable. So let me break it down in this case, because as Lindsay says, it's very hard to solve.
It's never good politics.
I guess the way I think about it is there is commoditized technology, really good, robust, commoditized technology, off-the-shelf stuff that the large swathe of what I would call the British Mittelstand, to use that German word, British SMEs, mid-sized businesses, should be adopting and are not. And what am I talking about? We're talking about CRM, financial management, sales pipeline, et cetera, right? These are commoditized tools. You can buy them from Salesforce, or you can buy them from a local vendor. There's nothing, particularly innovative. The application in your sector may require some adjustments, but it's not particularly innovative. But if companies would adopt even these basic tools, I think we would see a massive transformation and what I think of as a sort of, doubling of their engagement with other more innovative digital tools. So I start from the question, how do we basically get the British Mittelstand to adopt commoditized tools? And this is a really thorny one. And the best answer I have been able to find, looking around the world, is that there seems to be a correlation between digital adoption across the sort of mid-sized businesses and the extent to which communication with government is required to be digital. So if you have to do everything in your correspondence with the tax authorities, with the equivalent of Companies House, with health and safety organization, whatever it is in your sector, maybe trading standards or whatever, if everything has to be done through one portal that is digitized, that is mandatory, that you are issued the moment you register a Companies House, then there seems to be a correlation with greater digital uptake of those companies. And so I'm sorry to speak at length, but that takes us back to the role of government here, which is we do not have that in the UK. We have many different systems, all of which are voluntary. You can use, you want to do it, you want to submit your digitally with HMRC, go ahead. But if you want to write in, that seems to be okay too. And I think that is at the heart of the problem and at the heart of what can be the solution. We need, I think, government to offer a framework that just digitizes that critical relationship, upon which companies can then find it easier to build the CRM system. Because frankly, if you are digitizing your tax communication, it's easier to then add a financial management system, and then it's easier to add a logistics management system, and then it's easier, et cetera, supply chain, blah, blah, blah. You see where I'm going.
So, okay, you've got a crystal ball, Daniel, because you've answered one of my kind of summary questions. So we've got people here from central government at this event, and we've got people here from local government at this event. If you could have one ask of each about about how they're going to help their economy grow using digital, what is your ask? So what is your ask to central government, and what is your one ask to local government? Daniel, you've already given me your central government answer, so I now need your local government answer, and then I'm going to come to Lindsay.
Look, I mean, I think that quite often the way in which local government engages with local suppliers is in a way that helps neither the local government nor the supplier. It's sort of who's out there, how can we quickly, do something, and do they fit in and do they not fit in, and so on. I think that, and we've been chatting a bit on the chat channel with I think it was is it Richie Somerville that raised this point about the importance of procurement frameworks. We do not have dynamic, smart, in my view, private public procurement systems that allow local authorities to more effectively understand who's in their local community, who can be bandied together in order to bid for things. So my one ask would be to take some of the really innovative procurement frameworks that are there and bring them to your local community, because there is evidence that if you use those frameworks, you find more companies, you take business to those companies, and you get better quality.
Fantastic. Right, Lindsay, you don't know the lottery numbers as well, Daniel, do you? Lindsay, central government, local government, what are your two asks?
Mine are very similar to Daniel's, to be honest. I think the key thing is about flexibility.
We're losing you again, Lindsay.
Sorry. My asks are very much about flexibility and innovations. The companies have been able to respond and pivot in the current climate are the ones that are being successful. We need to ensure that whatever we're doing can be done on a similar way. So if, making sure that value for money statement isn't just about the cost and the lean efficiencies of things, making sure that we can integrate and write in to whatever activities we're doing, that social and environmental and local element to it as well. People buy from people still, and we need to make sure that we can enable that within the frameworks.
Okay.
Can I add one thought, which really plays off something I think there's been a leitmotif in Lindsay's comments. We have something called the Social Value Act. I don't know how many people are aware of the Social Value Act, but the Social Value Act was pushed through, I'm going to think 2011, maybe 2010, and it creates space in commercial and procurement decisions to consider a whole range of other factors, including local factors, It doesn't mean that you are allowed to, pick a local company, but it does create a handrail, and I just don't think people use it very much. So in a way, maybe one of the things that we should be asking for is a sort of handbook of tools that can be used at local level if you want to engage in some of this. Some of those tools will be legal and regulatory, and some of those tools might be digital and framework, like the Bloom framework in the Northeast is a particularly effective and innovative framework. So maybe a sort of handbook that could help people pick up on these things would be useful.
We maybe need to look at the commercial and pricing model behind Bloom, but I get where you're coming from.
But look, I mean, they're different. I don't have a stake in them. I've dealt with a lot of frameworks, and I've seen both the good and the bad, and they just strike me as having lots of useful components. And I think we should sort of learn from the things that seem to be working to some degree.
Yeah,
it's learning from those good, and sharing that within the public sector, but also with the private sector that want in these things, because the amount of resources is wasted on both sides, and we end up with the same thing that we ended up with before. That's got to change.
Lindsay, again, I'm sure that last point was incredibly salient, but we missed it.
It's this Wi-Fi and broadband.
Right, we've run 2 minutes over. So to the audience, we're starting again at 1 o'clock, I believe, on the main stage. And there are also some polls. If you could go onto the polls and answer the questions. To Lindsay Robinson from Digital City and Daniel Korski from Public, thank you very much for being involved in the panel. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.